Tonight's story is proof that the most ordinary thing in the world, a simple email in your inbox, can hide something far more terrifying than you could ever imagine. And I know this because I was the one who opened it when I should have left it alone. My name is Ronnie Claus, and what I'm about to tell you is not just some campfire story or a piece of urban legend I heard from a friend of a friend. It is what happened to me. And every time I replay that night in my head, I can still feel the way my stomach sank, the way the cold bled into my hands as if I'd brushed against something I wasn't meant to touch. If you're someone who enjoys stories that are strange, dark, and unsettling, then you've found the right place because I share them once a week. And you might want to subscribe before you forget. Just make sure you don't open any strange emails after this, because you'll never look at your inbox the same way again. Now let me set the stage. It was a Tuesday night in early spring, the kind of night where the world feels halfway between seasons, the air outside my apartment carrying both the chill of winter that didn't want to leave and the faint promise of warmer days that hadn't quite arrived. I worked late, came home with the usual weight of office drudgery clinging to me, and sat at my desk intending to clear out my inbox before bed. I was tired, maybe too tired to notice details that would later claw at me, but when the subject line of one particular email flickered into my view, something about it seemed off. It read in stark block letters, "Open if you're ready." No sender name, no reply address, nothing in the fields that should have given me some hint of who had sent it. At first, I laughed bitterly under my breath, thinking it was spam, some ridiculous phishing attempt from a bot that hadn't been coded correctly. But then my mouse hovered, frozen over that line like it had been caught in amber. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe boredom, maybe something else entirely. But I clicked. The message itself was almost empty. Just one line in the body of the email that read, "We've been waiting." Beneath that, there was an attachment, a photo file. Its size too small to be anything more than a snapshot, and yet when I clicked to open it, the loading felt unbearably slow, as if something behind the screen was deciding whether or not to let me see. Finally, the image resolved, and what I saw made my breath falter. It was a picture of my own porch, taken at night. I recognized the dented metal bird Katrina had placed on the railing, its chipped paint catching the glare of a light that wasn't mine. The angle of the photo was what turned my stomach. The only way it could have been captured was if someone had stood right there on my property, within arm's reach of the front door. My pulse thundered as I scanned the rest of the message for a signature or a clue, but there was nothing, except the silence of that one line and the image staring back at me. Around me, life carried on as if nothing was happening. My neighbors' televisions buzzed faintly through the wall, the pipes rattled with their usual metallic complaint. But I sat frozen, staring at a piece of proof that the boundary between my safe private world and the faceless infinite void of the internet had been deliberately breached. I wanted to believe it was a joke, maybe a prank from a coworker, but the dread was different this time. You know how when you step into your home after a long day, you feel that sigh of relief, that invisible shield against the outside world wrapping itself around you? That night, as I stared at the photograph, that shield shattered. It wasn't just the porch that was captured, it was the quiet familiarity of my life, now transformed into evidence that someone had been close enough to see, close enough to record, close enough to remind me that nothing in my home was truly mine.
And that was just the beginning. At first, I told myself it was nothing, just some sick prank or maybe a mistake. But that little voice in the back of my mind refused to shut up, whispering that whoever sent that email had been right there, standing on my porch in the dead of night while I slept inside unaware, and I couldn't let that go. The next morning at work, when my coworkers chattered about mundane things, weekend plans, movies, complaints about the boss, I sat stiff in my chair, refreshing my inbox every few minutes, my stomach twisting with both dread and expectation. And sure enough, just before lunch, another email arrived. This one didn't bother with a subject line, just blank, as if the sender didn't even need a title anymore. And when I clicked it open, my heart nearly stopped because staring back at me from the attachment was not some distant porch photo, but a crisp, close-up shot of my mailbox, the exact junk mail and utility bill I had shoved inside the night before. Every detail preserved, down to the small scratch on the metal slot I'd never paid attention to until that moment. No text accompanied it, no explanation, just the image. As if the message itself was, "We see you, we follow you, we're closer than you realize." My hands were clammy, shaking so badly I had to pretend to be typing some report just to keep from drawing attention to myself. And when my manager asked if I was feeling all right, I lied, saying it was just a headache. By the time I got home that evening, I was practically sprinting from my car to the front door, half expecting to see someone crouched in the hedges or waiting at the steps. But of course, the street was quiet, deceptively ordinary, as if daring me to call myself paranoid. Inside, I locked the door and double-checked the windows, even pulled the curtains tight. But no matter how much I tried to barricade myself with routine, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes pressing through the walls. That night, as I sat on the couch pretending to watch TV, another email notification pinged, sharp as a blade in the silence, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. This time, the subject line spelled my name. "Ronnie, are you sure?" The body of the message contained a collage, 5 smaller images arranged like puzzle pieces, and my chest went cold as I recognized each one instantly. My dented car bumper in the lot, my desk drawer at work with the stapler crooked exactly as I had left it, the kitchen counter at home with a coffee ring that hadn't been wiped up, and finally a blurry shot of my bedroom door cracked just slightly open, the soft glow of the hallway light spilling in. That last image nearly broke me because it meant whoever this was hadn't just been outside, hadn't just been circling like some vulture. They had been inside, in my most private space, close enough to breathe the same air, and I hadn't even known. My skin crawled with goosebumps, and I slammed the laptop shut, but the after image of those pictures burned into my mind. I wanted to scream for help, call the police, tell Katrina everything, but some stubborn part of me thought, what if I'm overreacting? What if they laugh at me? What if this is just some hacker pulling pictures from God knows where? I paced the living room until my legs ached, every creak in the floorboards making me flinch, and when I finally sat back down, exhausted and hollow, I realized I was listening, straining my ears not for the ordinary noises of the neighborhood, but for something unnatural. The scrape of a shoe outside, the whisper of fabric against wood, the sound of someone testing a lock they weren't supposed to touch. That was the first night I couldn't sleep. The first night I realized this wasn't just junk mail, wasn't just a prank. It was the first sign that my life had been pierced, that someone out there was watching, documenting, learning me, and worst of all, enjoying every second of it.
The next few days passed like a fever dream. Every ordinary thing around me soured by suspicion, until my home, the one place that used to feel safe, began to feel like a stage where I was forced to perform for an audience I could never see. When I left for work, I scanned the street, eyes darting from the neighbors' hedges to the parked cars, convinced that one of them hid the lens that had been aimed at me. When I returned, I walked through each room slowly, whispering to myself like a madman, touching counters and doorknobs to make sure nothing had been moved, trying to memorize the way things were so I would know if they were different tomorrow. I even checked the attic one night, flashlight in hand, but found only dust and the faint smell of insulation, though the silence up there was so oppressive I came down shaking. The emails didn't stop, they multiplied. Sometimes they came in the middle of the day, other times they arrived just before I fell asleep, as if timed to fracture the illusion of rest. One had a single line, "You look tired." Another simply said, "Nice shirt today." Each note was paired with another photo, me in the parking lot, me bent over the kitchen sink, me staring blankly at the television, and none of them showed the presence of whoever had taken them, which meant they had been closer than I could imagine, close enough to vanish into the blind spots of my life. My paranoia began to eat at my marriage. Katrina asked why I was jumpy, why I double-locked doors, and stared at my phone like it was a loaded gun. But I couldn't bring myself to tell her the full truth. She laughed off the idea of someone messing with us, said it was probably spam or some kid with too much time, but she hadn't seen what I had seen, hadn't felt the way my stomach hollowed out when I realized the picture of my desk drawer had been taken while I was still in the office. By the third week, I wasn't just anxious, I was unraveling. My hands trembled constantly, my sleep was shredded by nightmares in which my inbox was endless. Each new message a door opening into another photograph of me sleeping, me eating, me existing like a lab rat in a cage. Then one evening, while scrolling through the latest email with a drink shaking in my hand, I noticed something different in the background of one of the photos. A figure, small and blurry, almost camouflaged against the shadowed edge of the frame. At first I thought it was an error, a trick of bad pixels, but when I zoomed in, I could see it more clearly. The outline of a man, tall, his head tilted as though studying me with amusement, and the faint impression of teeth stretched too wide in a grin. That was when I realized the sender wasn't just watching, they wanted me to know they were there, that they had always been there. My breath grew shallow and I closed the laptop so hard the screen cracked, but the damage was done. From then on, the house itself seemed to breathe with me, its walls creaking in time with my pulse, its windows reflecting back my own fear. I started leaving lights on in every room, pacing the hall at night like a guard, whispering to myself that I would catch them, that I wouldn't let them win. But deep down, I already knew. I wasn't guarding my house anymore. I was guarding myself from the inevitable moment when whoever was behind those emails stepped out of the shadows and into the light. And that thought terrified me more than anything else, because the question was no longer if they would come, but when.
The night everything changed was ordinary in a way that made it crueler. I'd had a few beers with friends to take the raw edge off the fear, thinking a little liquid courage might help me sleep, and came home feeling stupider and braver in equal measure. Stupider because I was drunk, braver because alcohol blunted the teeth of my panic long enough for me to act on a terrible impulse. There was another handwritten note on the porch when I stumbled up the path, the same clumsy script I'd been getting for months. J.C. Bradley's signature, that stupid 1:47 a.m. that had haunted the margins of my life. I remember thinking, in a foggy, petulant way, that whoever it was finally getting creative. Why send the same thing twice when you could at least vary your cruelty? My keys fumbled in my hand because my fingers were clumsy and because I didn't want to go inside and sit with the silence. And when I opened the door, the house smelled exactly the same. Detergent and old coffee and the faint perfume Katrina used that always caught at the back of my throat. I should have installed a camera sooner. I should have done 1,000 things differently, but hindsight is a distant conversation, and I was in the moment. And the moment told me to strike back at the anonymous force that was stalking us. I sat on the couch, phone clutched like a talisman, and as the clock crawled toward 1:47 a.m., I scrolled until my thumbs went numb. The funny thing about fear is that it changes how time feels. Minutes stretch into bands of taut lyre, and the world refracts into small, sharp points. When the minute hand lurched to that cursed time, I hit call because the note commanded it, because the handwriting had become a dare, and I am not proud of how easy a dare can be to accept when you're tired and angry and scared. The line rang once, twice. The sound was absurdly loud in the quiet house. And then a sound came back that was not a voice in the way we mean when we speak to one another. It was a chorus, a handful of voices folded together, not quite in unison, words smudged by something else, metallic and wet, so that they were at once familiar and monstrously alien. They answered my drunken rant with 3 syllables stretched into a dozen. Accept it. The call dropped. I laughed then, a thin, ugly sound that anger and sorrow made, and that laugh died midair when the lock on my front door turned. I froze because the house was locked. Katrina always locked it, and so did I. The doorknob twisted and the door opened inward without a footfall, without the scrape of someone's shoes. There was a presence beyond the threshold that did not need to announce itself with common human movement. It simply was there, as if the dark had taken shape and decided to walk. I remember the grin more than anything else, a ridiculous, impossible smile that widened more than a human jaw should allow, teeth gleaming in the doorway like a promise. It wasn't a person stepping into the room so much as a void shaped into a man, limbs that seemed to slide rather than move, an absence that occupied space and then leaned in like breath on my face. I scrambled backward, a feeble animal knocking over a lamp, my heart tapping an erratic rhythm against my ribs, and I swear,
No one would believe me if I didn't say it. This thing did not make the motion of walking. It was closer and then closer without the physics of movement I know and trust. I tried to yell to make any sound that might break the spell, but my mouth filled with that awful, clammy silence you only get when terror packs your throat full of ice. I crawled toward the kitchen and the back door as if the backyard might be a place to run to, but the back door was locked from the outside. I fumbled the latch, my hands slick, and when I threw it open, cold air hit me like an accusation. I fell down the deck steps, and the grass tore at my pants as if the world itself were trying to stop me from leaving. And when I looked back, the thing in the doorway lifted one arm in a motion like closing the door of a refrigerator. Then nothing. The rest is a blur stitched together by the kind of trauma memory that rearranges events into narrative fragments. Waking up wet and shivering on my neighbor's lawn with someone's grip around my wrist, the blur of blue lights, the parade of uniforms, and the way an ambulance made ordinary sounds into a funeral march. They told me later that there had been a break-in, that the house had been disturbed, and then they told me the thing you never think will happen to you until it is the only thing left of your life. Katrina was found. I did not see what they saw. They took me aside and tried to soften it, hands on my shoulders like a doctor easing a wound bandage off, saying maybe it was better I didn't look. My chest closed up at that equivocation. Pain is easier to bear when it is clear. They said there was no sign of forced entry past the unusual entry point, that there were traces that suggested someone had been inside with access, and that some evidence could not be processed in a way that gave meaning. The world spun slow and mean as they locked my front door and took prints that would do nothing to stitch back the night into sense. Later, weeks later, after the dazed bargaining and the hollowed rituals of funerals and funeral food, someone slipped a plain envelope under the door of the motel where I stayed, and on a single sheet of paper, written in that same clumsy hand, were 2 words: pleasure doing business. There was no flourish, no signature, nothing but the same callous punctuation of cruelty. I burned that note in the motel sink because it was all I had left that I could control, and the smoke of it curled like a little ghost that went up and out and did not bring Katrina back.
Grief has a way of hollowing you out, until every sound echoes like it's coming from inside a cave. And in the weeks after Katrina's funeral, I felt less like a man and more like a shell that someone had cracked open and left behind. And yet the story didn't stop there, because the emails didn't stop either. In fact, they changed. Before, they had been taunts, photographs, strange intrusions into my daily routine. But after that night, after the police carried away what little was left of my life, the tone shifted into something far more sinister, as though whoever was behind them no longer needed to convince me of their presence, because now they owned me. The first message came a week later, subject line blank, body text nothing but a simple sentence: she's still with us. My breath hitched so hard it felt like my ribs cracked, because even though I knew what the police had told me, knew what the coroner had confirmed, there was still that sick part of me that wanted to believe. And when I opened the attachment, I almost dropped my phone. The image was of our kitchen table, but the chair Katrina always sat in had been pulled out, and a faint blur, a smudge of color, sat in the seat, as if the camera had tried to capture someone moving too quickly. My hands trembled as I stared at that blur, convincing myself it was her, that she'd come back, that maybe the thing I'd seen that night had taken her rather than destroyed her. But another part of me, the part that still had enough sense left to be afraid, whispered that the blur was something else entirely, something that had been in my home long before the emails, something that was now making itself comfortable in the space she used to fill. I started drinking more heavily then, keeping beer in the fridge, whiskey on the counter, anything that might quiet the hum of dread. But the more I drank, the bolder the emails became, as though they could smell the weakness on me. One came at exactly 1:47 a.m. again, waking me from a shallow, nightmare-choked sleep. It contained an audio file, nothing else. And when I played it, I nearly threw my phone across the room, because it wasn't just noise. It was the sound of someone breathing on the other end, wet and close, and underneath the inhale-exhale rhythm was a faint scrape, like a chair being dragged slowly across a floor. Another email followed 2 nights later. Subject line, "We like how you run." The attachment was a grainy video of me stumbling out the back door that night, the same night Katrina vanished, captured from an angle I hadn't seen before, as if there had been more than one set of eyes, more than one watcher while I fled. My body went cold all over, because that confirmed something I hadn't let myself admit. The figure that entered my home wasn't alone. I tried showing the police the emails again, forwarding them with shaking hands, but the officer's face was the same as before, politely skeptical, like he was indulging the grief of a widower who was slowly unraveling. "These could be doctored," he said. "Hoaxes, deepfakes even." I wanted to shake him, to scream that no digital trickery could explain the way the air in my house still felt wrong, heavy, like a damp blanket thrown over my face. Nights grew unbearable. I left every light on, sat awake until dawn staring at the front door, daring it to open, and every creak of the building made me twitch. Once, half asleep, I thought I saw the door handle move again, just the faintest twitch, but when I blinked it was still, and I told myself it was exhaustion. But deep down I knew better. The emails had become more than threats. They were invitations. Each one carried a command hidden in plain sight. Call, open, listen, look. And like a fool I kept obeying, because not knowing was worse than knowing. And every new message promised, in its twisted way, some fragment of an answer. Yet every time I opened one, all I found was another piece of evidence that the nightmare was not finished, that whatever had taken Katrina was still circling, patient and smiling, waiting for me to break enough to let it all the way in.
People talk about grief as if it has stages, as though you can neatly box it up into denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, and then you're done. But that isn't how it worked for me. My grief was a living thing, a parasite that wrapped itself around every moment, whispering in my ear at night, pushing me to open more messages, to keep feeding the monster that had already taken everything. And the worst part was that I let it. I told myself I needed answers, that if I just looked hard enough, opened enough emails, listened closely enough to those static-choked recordings, I might understand what happened to Katrina, might reclaim some shred of control over the story of my life. But the truth is, I was being played. Each message bait on a hook I couldn't stop biting. In the days after the funeral, I took time off work, sat in the apartment with the curtains drawn, the glow of my laptop the only light, drinking in every word, every image, until it was like I was living in two realities. The quiet, dust-filled rooms around me, and the haunted theater of my inbox, where someone else directed the show. That was when the breathers started, as if whoever was behind this knew I was spiraling and wanted to pace my torment properly. There would be gaps, 2 days, 3 days, when nothing came. No emails, no photos, no distorted voices in the night. And in those silences, I would almost start to believe it was over, almost feel the weight begin to lift, until the next message landed with surgical precision, hitting me harder than the last. One of those breaks fell on a Sunday, a gray day when the rain slicked the streets and the whole world smelled of wet pavement. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, staring at Katrina's untouched mug still in the cabinet, and trying to convince myself I should go outside, take a walk, breathe something other than recycled fear. For a few hours, I actually managed to pretend it normalcy. I walked to the corner store, bought milk, even exchanged a nod with the neighbor who had found me that night collapsed in the grass. The world didn't end, the sky didn't split open, and I thought maybe, just maybe, it was done. But that evening, just as the quiet had started to feel bearable, my laptop chimed, and there it was, a new message. Subject line, "You looked better today." My blood iced, because it wasn't just the words, it was the timestamp, sent at the exact moment I'd passed the mirror in the store and noticed I didn't look like a ghost for once. The attachment this time wasn't a photo or a video. It was a simple Word document with one sentence repeated over and over. Open the door. Dozens of times, line after line, until my eyes blurred and the words stopped being words and became something rhythmic, a chant, a command. I closed the laptop so hard I thought I'd broken it, but the glow of the screen still seemed to pulse from behind the lid like a heartbeat. That night I didn't sleep at all.
I sat upright in bed, staring at the bedroom door, every muscle tense for the sound of the knob turning again. It never did, but around 3 a.m. I heard a whisper of movement in the hall, too soft to be the neighbors, too deliberate to be the house settling, and I swear I felt someone's breath push against the crack under the door. By morning, the silence had returned, clean and empty, and I was left wondering if I had imagined it, if the drinking had conjured ghosts, if grief had finally cracked me open. But deep down, I knew the truth. The silence wasn't mercy, it was intermission. They weren't done with me. They were just giving me enough space to breathe so I'd feel the suffocation more sharply when it came again.
It was almost a relief when the silence finally broke because the waiting had worn me down to the nub of my nerves. And when the next email landed in my inbox, I opened it without hesitation, like a man rushing to embrace the executioner just to end the suspense. The subject line this time was a question. Ready? The body contained no words, only a video file, and when I pressed play, the feed wasn't some distant snapshot or grainy collage, but a live stream. My live stream. I was staring at myself, sitting at the kitchen table in the same clothes I wore, the same lamp glowing above me, the same empty bottle of whiskey tipped over by my elbow, and the camera angle was from somewhere inside the room. I shot to my feet, heart lurching, scanning the corners, the shelves, the ceiling, trying to find where the lens was hidden, but the video lagged by half a second, my own frantic movements mocking me back at me like a ghost stuck in a mirror. My chest tightened so hard I thought I was going to black out, and then the feed flickered, cutting away from me and into the hallway where a shadow moved, long, unnatural, stretching across the floor before any figure stepped into sight. And then it did. The thing. The grin. The same too wide mouth, the same weightless glide instead of steps, the same patient calm, except this time it wasn't on tape, wasn't a photo, wasn't some digital game. It was in my house and I could hear it. The soft hiss of something dragging against the floorboards, the rasp of breath that wasn't mine. I bolted for the bedroom, slammed the door, shoved a chair under the knob like some flimsy shield, but almost instantly the chair began to shudder as the handle turned from the other side. My body shook so violently I thought my bones would rattle out of place. I shouted words, curses, prayers, I don't even know, my voice hoarse and broken, but the only reply was that distorted chorus I'd once heard over the phone, bleeding now through the door like the wood itself was vibrating with their voices. Accept it. The chair jerked forward once, twice, then stilled. Silence. That was somehow worse. I pressed my ear to the door, sweat dripping down my temples, and heard nothing. For a moment I thought maybe they'd gone. Maybe it was a hallucination fed by grief and exhaustion. Then, slowly, a sound rose from behind me, from inside the bedroom. The quiet creak of weight settling onto the mattress. I spun around and my heart nearly tore itself out of my chest because there, on Katrina's side of the bed, the covers had sunk into the shape of a body, pressed as if someone invisible had just lain down. I screamed, stumbling backward into the door, fumbling with the chair to free myself, but the door flung open before I could move it, and the grin was there, inches from my face, teeth stretching too far, eyes like hollow sockets filled with static light. I don't remember how I made it out. I only know that somehow my body chose survival over reason. I ran. Out the door, into the night, bare feet slapping the pavement, lungs ripping themselves apart as I screamed for anyone, anything, until neighbors' lights flicked on and voices cut the dark. By the time police arrived, the thing was gone. The house looked normal, undisturbed, no sign of forced entry, no video feed on the laptop, nothing but me, babbling, trembling, clutching at my chest like a madman. They searched, of course, they always search, but they found nothing. And I could see it in their eyes. To them, I was just a broken widower chasing ghosts. But I knew what I had seen, what had lain down beside me in that bed, what had looked me in the eye and smiled with a mouth too wide. And deep inside, beneath the terror, beneath the grief, a darker realization began to root. They weren't trying to kill me.
They were trying to claim me, the way they had claimed Katrina. And all I had done by surviving that night was delay the inevitable.
I left the house that night and never went back. Not once. Not even in daylight. Not even with company. Because to me, it wasn't a home anymore. It was a mouth, an open maw that had swallowed Katrina whole and was still hungry for me. And I wasn't about to feed it. I sold what I could, packed what little mattered into boxes, and took a motel room on the edge of town. The kind of place where the wallpaper peels and the carpet smells faintly of mildew, but at least the silence feels like just silence. Not a trap waiting to spring. For a while, I thought I could start over. Thought maybe putting miles between myself and that cursed address would weaken whatever had latched onto me. But grief is a shadow, and this shadow wasn't mine alone anymore. The emails followed. Even without my old laptop, even without the Wi-Fi password from that house, they found me. A week after moving into the motel, I opened the tiny brass mailbox in the lobby, and there it was. An envelope. Blank. No stamp. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper. That same jagged handwriting scrawled across it. The letters pressed deep, like whoever wrote them wanted to carve into my bones through the page. Pleasure doing business with you. That's all it said. I burned it in the bathroom sink, just like the last one, but the smoke didn't carry the words away. They stayed, etched behind my eyes. Sometimes at night when the motel AC rattles, I hear the static of that distorted chorus under the hum. Sometimes I wake up at exactly 1:47 a.m. with the crushing certainty that someone has been sitting at the foot of my bed, waiting for me to open my eyes. I've thought about calling the police again, but what would I say? That ghosts with teeth too wide and emails that shouldn't exist are haunting me? They'd lock me up, maybe even pity me, but they wouldn't believe me, and in a way, I can't blame them. It sounds insane, even to me, except I know what I saw, what I heard, what I felt. I've started to notice little things here at the motel too. My toothbrush moved half an inch from where I left it. The faint scrape of a chair leg against the linoleum when I haven't been in the room. The cold dip of the mattress as though someone invisible has settled in beside me again. And each time I whisper to myself that this is the last straw, that I'll leave, run, change my name, burn my phone, anything to get away. But deep down, I know you can't outrun something that doesn't need roads to follow you. They live in silence, in static, in the spaces between sleep and waking. They don't need locks or walls or distance. They only need one thing. For you to look, to open, to accept. And I did. I opened that first email. I invited them in. And now the rest of my life is just waiting for the moment they decide to close their jaws around me the way they did around Katrina. So if you're listening to this, if you're hearing my story, take it as the only warning I can give you. When a message arrives in your inbox with no name, no sender, no reason, and it whispers for you to open it, don't. Don't click. Don't look. Don't let that curiosity bite into you the way it bit into me. Because once you do, it's already too late, and you'll find yourself staring into a grin that stretches too wide, listening to voices that speak in a chorus not meant for human ears, and wondering if maybe the only thing left for you is to accept it too. And so I live now with the kind of silence that doesn't comfort. It hunts. The emails stopped, the letters slowed, but the dread never left. Every night at 1:47 a.m. I wake up without reason, staring at the shadows at the foot of my bed, afraid that the next breath I take won't be mine alone. I opened the email. I accepted the invitation. And I can't help but wonder, if you ever receive a message with no name, no sender, no explanation, and it whispers for you to open it, Will you resist the urge to click? Or will you make the same mistake I did? If you made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. If it kept you awake, disturbed you, or even just made you double check your inbox, then don't forget to subscribe and join me for more tales like this. You'll find other terrifying stories waiting here, each one darker than the last. And remember, when the world goes quiet and the clock reads 1:47 a.m., don't answer, don't open, and don't invite them in. Because some things only come after midnight.